Hello, friends. Patrick McFarland here, coming at you with another episode of the Liberty Weekly podcast. This one should be episode 72, and the show notes will be found at libertyweekly.net/72, as always. And we're really excited to get into this one. Sorry that this is coming out a bit later on Monday than usual, just because classes are over, and that's monumental for me, and I'm still trying to figure out what that means. In terms of my schedule, I still have 2 more finals to take, but everything should be done by the 14th, and I've just kind of been taking some time to relax, doing a little celebration before graduation here. So, yeah, and I have a good episode here for you today. Really excited to talk about this topic, and I'm kind of getting to the point with the show where I've said things on a number of issues, and I've published works on a number of issues. So now I can go back and point to things that I've done in the past and say, hey, check this out. And it's pretty cool because there's actually has been growth in the audience since I've had some listeners. I've had some really great guests, Anthony Samaroff, and okay, maybe I won't try and name them all, but I've had some great guests. It's brought some new blood into the group. So what I really want to do is, in this episode, highlight some good work that I did last year. And the podcast is coming to its 1-year anniversary. I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do to celebrate, if anything. I don't want to make too much work for myself. But around this time last year, I had just finished my long paper requirement for law school, and I decided I took a seminar course with a really great professor at our school who's a leftist, but he's great. He's very intelligent. And it was American legal history, and I've talked about this on the podcast quite a bit. It was my favorite class by far in law school because Professor Steenson just said, "Hey, do whatever you want." I mean, anything from the entire British constitutional history up into the modern day, as long as it regards the Constitution or constitutions in general, because that's what we focused on. So I decided to write about nullification. And it served me very well. I think maybe around this time a year ago, I had discovered Tom Woods. And Tom Woods, the biggest main issue that attracted me to Tom Woods was the nullification issue. And the fact that we actually have something in the as an anarchist, I don't try to appeal to the Constitution very often, but we actually have a mechanism in the Constitution that would allow for secession on a massive scale. And that is well-founded through James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, who penned the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions that solidified nullification as a legitimate constitutional strategy for standing up to the federal government or to state governments for that matter. And interestingly enough, we'll get into that as well. So if you haven't already, let's see here. If you haven't already, just before we dive into it, I would like to highlight my episode 71 because I'm very proud of that episode. I did a legal analysis of a police brutality case that happened in Milwaukee County, and I just had a few notes about that episode. Is that ever since I started, one of the first comments that I got was that when Jerry and I would host the show together, we would dilly and dally, and we would there would be, I don't know, it was supposed to be a conversational style show, but one of the first bits of feedback that I got back was complaining about how long it was. And ever since then, I've, in my mind, have felt bad for putting out long shows. And I've kind of felt bad for not trying to state things as succinctly as they could have been stated. And I felt like that episode went a little longer, but nonetheless, I feel like if you have the time, there's good content in there and good analysis. And when I do shows like this, where I kind of try and analyze things off the cuff, I've always found that I never fully 100% understand the topic until after I've finished doing the show on it. And I kind of feel that way with this episode because I didn't realize the exact legal case that I would have made until after I'd finished the show and listened to it or watched it 1 or 2 times through. Another thing about it is that I felt like I really have not yet solidified my personal and professional feelings about police officers and veterans. And just a few notes on that before I get into this episode is just that, I don't want to spend my whole time worrying about upsetting someone, because that's not what this is about. You know, what this show is about. When it comes to veterans, I'm super fascinated with, I've been on a tear with Iraq War II and Operation Iraqi Freedom for the last few days. And I really don't know how I feel about veterans. Like, at one point, I want to pity them, but the second point, they'll say that they're all volunteers and they signed up for it. And, you know, either they're, I'm treading this dichotomy between wanting to call them baby killers and having some sympathy for the fact that soldiers are victims as well. And I think that's true, they are. And, you know, they'll say they signed up for it. And these are sensitive topics, and I really think that I did contact Rayford Davis, and I'm excited to have him on the show in episode 73 or 74, because he confirmed, and I'm going to ask him, you know, professionally as I go forward, how should, as a former police officer who is now a voluntarist, he probably realizes that there are good people that are police officers. And I'm an individualist. I believe, you know, you can't just say, you know, I guess you could say, according to the NAP definitions, yes, all police officers objectively violate rights, so they are absolutely doing wrong. But as an individualist, I think it does matter what's going through each one of their heads. And I would say the same about soldiers. That doesn't absolve them of, you know, moral things that they do in the line of service. Obviously, I think mass murder is one of them, killing people. So, you know, you try and balance that. And I want to condemn amoral behavior on behalf of soldiers, but I also want to greet them with understanding and forgiveness and compassion, because what else can we do as anarchists? You know, I mean, that's what this is about, right? Understanding, forgiveness, and compassion, and trying to make them realize, you know, maybe they realize on a fundamental level the wrong that they've done. So sorry to go off on that tangent, but I had some thoughts about episode 71. They're going to be further developed because there are a few topics that are not yet developed in my ANCAP lexicon, and understanding how to feel about police officers and soldiers with the truths that we've come, you know, to bear, the truths that we've come to bear. It's a really hard topic, and I really just I don't want to offend anyone, and I know that's kind of a cop-out, but I think it is a real serious issue. You're talking about life and death, killing, you know. So still developing that. My biggest fear is that someone would stop listening to my show because they disagreed with one thing that I've said. And I hope that's not the case, listeners. I really do enjoy having this platform, and I don't want to change my opinions because of that. I don't want to change my content because I'm afraid of what people will think. So, confession time there. First 8 minutes of the show. All right, so let's get into the content then here today without any further dallying. But this is the show, or this is the topic that I wanted to cover. Here's an article from the Mises Institute that I found on it by Tho Bishop, although I first saw this on my Facebook news feed, this article from Fox News. On the screen here it says, for you listening to the audio version, where the video, you should be watching the video version embedded in the show notes page at libertyweekly.net/72. However, I digress. It says, Illinois counties form, quote, sanctuaries for gun owners to thwart states' push for gun control. So, we all know that the communist People's Democratic Republic of Illinois has very strict gun control laws. Also, Chicago has some of the highest crime rates regarding guns in the nation, so we can see that correlation there. However, correlation is not causation, but logic matters. So, here it is. The story. Multiple rural Illinois counties have passed resolutions enabling a so-called, quote, sanctuary for gun owners in a bid to thwart the state legislature's efforts to enact stricter gun control. At least 5 counties declared themselves sanctuary counties for gun rights, co-opting a word that most conservatives associate with the liberal policy of ignoring federal immigration laws. So isn't it great to be an ANCAP or a libertarian? I mean, we don't have to put up with cognitive dissonance. You can see on the right side, and this is the major lesson we'll get into later that I learned through writing my paper on nullification, was that throughout American history, nullification has been used in different ways. It is whoever is seeking power or seeking to make the political point believes in nullification. And whoever does not want to, does not believe in nullification, does not believe it's legitimate. And it goes from side to side, Democrat, Republican, left, right. At different points in time, they both believe in nullification. However, neither of them can get it right. The Republicans sometimes do, but as we'll see, neither of them really can get it right. So, someone right away is going to say, hey, Pat, this is not nullification because these are counties that are rejecting the dictates of the state legislature. Well, I think, obviously it can go both ways. You can have a state that wants to nullify against the federal government, or you can have a county that would like to nullify against the state legislature, or, hey, maybe even a municipality or a city wants to nullify the dictates of the county or of the state. Or, hey, maybe the neighborhood wants to nullify against the municipality or the county or the city or the state. Hey, maybe this household wants to nullify the dictates from the city, the neighborhood, or the county. So, the point of this episode is just to kind of laugh at both sides, man. I mean, a quick story here. I was the vice president of the Federalist Society at my law school that we kind of started because the 3Ls who were graduating, there was no one to take it over because, go figure, it's even though it's a private school, it's a liberal school. But we had a speaker come in to talk about the Electoral College. And this was right after Trump won, and everyone was wondering, what the Electoral College was because no one knows. And everyone wanted, the popular vote should win, and we should get rid of these, checks and balances or these protections against mob rule democracy. Well, the guy who came in was a conservative, and we were talking. I kind of proposed nullification to him, and he said, well, if you like nullification, then you must support sanctuary cities. Like, that was a checkmate because as a conservative, you can't have, you couldn't have the, you couldn't have the logical consistency. You couldn't have the principle of supporting nullification because if you're conservative, and I think this was the crux, the fallout from his argument is that if you're a conservative, well, you can't support nullification because if you supported nullification, then you would have to support the left's attempts to nullify. And that obviously can't be because the left is always wrong because they're not my team. So, I mean, you get the conundrum here, and I'm so glad that I'm not, a partisan like that anymore. But so I was going to go through this article. I mean, it just basically says what's going on here. The 5 counties declared themselves sanctuary counties. I love that they're trolling the left by using their terminology. I do like that, although I do support the left's right to have cities that decide to not obey federal laws or not help enforce federal immigration laws. I think that's tremendous. I mean, I wish those cities didn't have the power to legislate, that they didn't have a monopoly on violence, that they didn't have the power to import people using the state. So here, yes, they say, yes, we're using the sanctuary as a buzzword. We decided to turn it around to protect our Second Amendment rights. Well, they're all doing it wrong because what does sanctuary city even mean? Can you point in the Constitution, or wherever, where did this term sanctuary city come from? Well, what it's really called is nullification, and that's been around since, since the Alien and Sedition Acts, since the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions of 1798, which we'll get into. Let's see. 20 other counties in Illinois have asked for copies of the resolution. Counties in Oregon, officials in Oregon and Washington have also asked for copies. So, I mean, I 100%, 110, 120% support the right of counties to create sanctuaries and nullify Second Amendment regulation. That's great. That's tremendous. That's what the 10th Amendment Center is all about. I support nullification on both sides. I just wish they'd get it right. They don't get it right. What does sanctuary mean? Likewise, here's an article from Think Progress, which is just asinine, and I can't wait to tear it apart for you here. Illinois Republicans announced sanctuary status to fight gun restrictions. And then the subcaption, that's the title, right? And the subcaption says, that's not how sanctuary cities work. Okay, Eliam Katami, that's the author. Let's see. So let's see. Here's the first paragraph. Numerous jurisdictions in Illinois have declared themselves sanctuary cities for gun owners, co-opting the immigration term to push back against possible attempts by the state to pass gun restrictions. Not surprisingly, the move is rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of what sanctuary cities actually do. Oh, okay, Hatemi Kamati, or whatever the hell your name is. Please tell me how sanctuary cities work and what they do. Please inform me. He says, aiming to set themselves apart from sanctuary cities like Chicago, 5 rural Illinois. Okay, we already read that. It's a buzzword. Okay, we already heard that. He says, okay, but that's not how sanctuary cities work. Cities, states, and jurisdictions with sanctuary status have informal policies and laws in place to limit the cooperation between local law enforcement and federal immigration authorities. And the law grants states the right to do this. Okay, let's see. Refusal to cooperate with federal laws. That sounds oh, you mean like nullification? You mean like the nullification principle that was, used to fight Obamacare? The nullification principle that was used to nullify, in Wisconsin famously, to nullify the Fugitive Slave Act? Sounds like, it sounds like that principle to me. Why don't you name it, call it by its true name? Under the 10th Amendment, state governments are not required to enforce federal law. It's funny that the left, they twist themselves in these pretzel knots because, not my nullification. They twist themselves into these pretzel knots by saying, well, the nullification only exists when it does what we want it to do. That's the only way it works, is when we want it to do. And these are its reasons. So under the 10th Amendment, state governments are not required to enforce federal law. That's true. Meaning that local law enforcement officials do not have to assist the federal government in identifying and detaining immigrants. The Supreme Court has upheld this interpretation multiple times. Interesting. There's a link under multiple times right here. The Supreme Court has upheld this interpretation multiple times. Oh, why don't we follow these links? All right, here's the first link. Oh, yes. Prince v. United States. Okay. Well, this is a Supreme Court case, right? 1997. Let's see. Oh, the facts of the case. Oh, man, the facts. The Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act. Okay, so here he's citing a case. He says it's a Supreme Court case that upholds the fact that local law enforcement officials do not have to assist the federal government in identifying and detaining immigrants. To support this assertion, he cites this case, which has nothing to do with the stated purpose. He says that this case says that local law enforcement does not have to assist federal government in identifying and detaining immigrants. Well, that's not at all what this case is about. This case actually goes to support what the Illinois counties are saying, that, let's see, this is the holding of the case. This gun control bill required state officers to help enforce it. And the state challenged the constitutionality, saying that they don't have to do it. They said, okay, so here was the question. They said no. The court said that the local municipalities do not have to help enforce federal gun control regulation. The question was, using the necessary and proper clause of Article 1 as a justification, can Congress temporarily require states to regulate handgun purchases by performing those duties called for by the Brady Bill handgun application background check? The holding was no. So why is this being cited to say this assertion? All right, this probably par for the course for Think Progress. Well, okay, there's a second citation here. Let's see what that one says. All right. City of New York v. United States. United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. Interesting. United States Court of Appeals for the Second... Oh, that's not the Supreme Court at all, is it? Well, that's funny. His site says that the Supreme Court has ruled this multiple times. Interesting. Well, he's full of shit. I think that's apparent. Maybe not my sarcasm coming through a little thick. But, okay, so he's supported his assertion with 2 sites that contradict his statement and actually support the other side, because Prince v. United States is holding constitutional almost exactly what these Illinois counties are trying to do. Yes. So, the article, should we even continue with this article? Since immigration law is federal law, he writes further after those 2 awful citations. Since immigration law is federal law, it makes sense that catching unauthorized immigrants might not be a local law enforcement priority. After all, local police don't go out of their way to enforce tax law either. This is hard to read. That's what makes the appropriation of sanctuary in opposing gun laws so ridiculous. Effingham County Prosecutor Ryan Kibler, who came up with the idea, drew the false comparison when he said, according to the AP, that if the state passed such restrictions, we might not pay attention to it. That sounds like nullification to me. This is all nullification, and they're arguing over whether sanctuary cities is the proper terminology. Okay, so I'm not going to dwell on this Think Progress article. It's shorter, but yeah, deportations and arrests have actually risen over the years, he says. I thought that deportations increased significantly under the Obama administration, and the number of immigration-related arrests has jumped 25% since 2016. So, all right, well, that was painful. That was painful. I'm going to include links to all these in the show notes pages, as usual. I'm going to come back to this Mises Institute article because I want to touch on secession at the end. And, some libertarians support secession, some don't. Mostly your Mises Institute affiliated ones will support secession on any level. Generally, your more left, voluntarists, ANCAPs do not support secession as much. They do not see it as, they see it as a political problem. I would name Apollo Slater specifically as a person who would do that. I've had this argument before with him on Facebook, although it ended respectfully, and it's all fine. But he brought up some interesting points that I'll address towards the end. But I just wanted to talk about nullification as a general principle before I get to that. Way back and earlier in the podcast, episode 4, I did on nullification, where I went through in detail and explained. On the screen right now, you're seeing my nullification paper, which you can get if you subscribe to my email list by going to libertyweekly.net. I think it's email. You go to libertyweekly.net, click on this email list sign up in the horizontal bar. It'll get you those free ebooks, which include a copy of my nullification paper that I wrote. So nullification, it's just simply a principle which is the natural implication of the Declaration of Independence. It carries through that tradition, saying that, hey, you're free to leave at any time, And Jefferson and Madison embodied that, especially and wrote towards it in the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, which were passed as a response to the Alien and Sedition Acts. And it is a legitimate constitutional... James Madison is known as the father of the Constitution. It's a legitimate policy. If you're I'm not a constitutionalist. I think you gotta, as the listeners will know, I think that if you're facing a tyrant, it's nice to have a written constitution, because then you have some kind of legal authority that they might recognize from which to argue from. But essentially the Constitution is a slave document that none of us really signed, and no one who wrote it or signed it, even the people then existing, none of them had signed it. But in any event, they're all dead now, and they've been dead for like 5 generations, 6 generations. So None of that is binding on me. Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked with the constitutional arguments. There is, type in Constitution of No Authority into the bar. I think it's episode 27, 26, 27, 28, something like that. It's legitimate. One thing that I wanted to kind of poke fun at about the Fox News conservatives was just that it seems like they're, let's see. Oh yeah, they're saying this was, okay, going back to the Fox News article from the beginning. Some lawmakers are worried. A Democrat said, "I don't think you can say, I don't agree with the law, so I won't enforce it." Well, if the law is unjust, you have a duty to not obey. I think Thomas Jefferson said that. Kathleen Willis, a Democratic state representative from suburban Chicago, sponsored some of the gun legislation. I think it sends the wrong message. Well, I mean, it's embodying the messages of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, who I mean, James Madison wrote the Constitution, or a lot of it. So my little quibble with this is that I think it's a political move. I don't think that it's I mean, on behalf of those nullifying, it's a political move. I don't think they have the stones. If it came up to it, I would doubt they would have the stones to actually stand up to the state government or the federal government. I think this is a symbolic gesture. I mean, I hope that it's more than just that, but I mean, this disobedience, when it came down to it, would they have the stones to disobey or to declare a nullification on the county level? That would be badass. That would be badass. I think one thing that I covered in the nullification paper was just that they weren't the colonists anymore, but the early Americans, 20 years removed from the actual revolution, they still had stones. They still were, they were still vigilant enough to fight the Alien and Sedition Acts, which were a plain, I mean, the fact that the Alien and Sedition Acts passed goes to show that the Constitution is not effective at limiting the size and scope of government, because, I mean, how despotic were the Alien and Sedition Acts? And they were passed. They were allowed under their sunset clause, as I cover in the paper, they were allowed to go by the wayside. But so here, ultimately, I'm reading from my paper now. Ultimately, the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions were resolved as a response to the infamous Alien and Sedition Acts, a set of laws which Jefferson wrote were, quote, palpable violations of the Constitution. So the Constitution did a good job of preventing their passage. Sorry, Thomas Jefferson. The acts were passed in the summer of 1798 by a Federalist Congress, which claimed that the acts were necessary and proper because the constitutional order was threatened externally by the revolutionary French aggression and internally by Republican criticism of the government, which was seen by Federalists as treason rather than partisanship. So I go through the actual acts and some of what was said about the acts. So I'm just sorry, I'm trying to get to the part where, okay, so the Alien and Sedition Acts were objected to by Republicans on a variety of constitutional grounds, but relatively speaking were the least controversial of the four. The Alien Friends Acts gave the president the power to deport resident aliens who were dangerous to the peace and safety of the United States, end quote, and expired after 2 years. Yada, 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 Alien Enemies Act. In many ways, the public fear instilled by the Alien Friends Act was more effective than any federal action under the laws. So I'll say that again. In many ways, the public fear that was instilled by the passage of the Alien Friends Act was more effective than any federal action under the laws to enforce the act. As early as May 3rd, 1798, Jefferson reported to his friend Madison that, quote, the threatening appearance from the alien bills have so alarmed the French who are among us that they are going off. A ship chartered by themselves for this purpose will sail within about a fortnight for France with as many as she can carry. Following passage, some blank orders of deportation were signed by Adams, but never in force, possibly because many French nationals had already left the country. The Alien Act was not renewed and was allowed to expire pursuant to its 2-year sunset clause.
Violated the First Amendment. Okay. The Sedition Act saw at least 25 arrests and 14 indictments under it. The most famous of which were that of Matthew Leone, Benjamin Franklin Bosch, Benjamin Franklin's grandson, Thomas Cooper, and Thomas Callender. Although the Sedition Act saw relatively few indictments, many of the trials became national spectacles by which the Republican press could publicly display the act's overtly partisan nature. It seemed that even at that time, there was a bigger national conversation about these bills than we would get now. So this is how the Spirit of 98 came to be about, as I titled it. So basically, Thomas Jefferson, excuse me. Okay, I'm sorry. I won't go through all this because I already covered it in my episode 4, libertyweekly.net/4. However, all I want to do is get to the one part where the resolutions are passed. Okay, these are the original nullification resolutions, the same as the Illinois counties will declare in wake of the unconstitutional firearm regulation. These are the originals. So the purpose of the two documents was to explain and justify their narrow construction views on the basis of a full-fledged theory of the Constitution's origins, nature, and purpose. Inherent therein was their view that the Constitution was a compact between the states who retained their undiminished sovereignty as high contracting parties. So the resolutions are thoroughly saturated with language invoking the compact theory of the Constitution. Jefferson begins the Kentucky resolutions of 1798 by saying thus: Resolved that the several states composing the United States of America are not united on the principles of unlimited submission to their general government, but that by compact under the style and title of a Constitution for the United States, that to this compact each state acceded as a state and is an integral party, its co-states forming as to itself the other party. Madison echoes this sentiment in the Virginia resolutions of 1798. Quote, that this assembly doth explicitly and peremptorily declare that it views the powers of the federal government as resulting from the compact to which the states are parties. That's the father of the Constitution right there. Would that not imply then that each county is a separate entity making up a state in of itself? I guess that depends on the state constitution. I think it would imply that fact. The Kentucky legislature reasserted this understanding of the federal union with its 1999 resolutions that the several states who formed the Constitution, being sovereign and independent, had the unquestionable right to judge of the infraction, and that a nullification by those sovereignties of all unauthorized acts done under color of that instrument is the rightful remedy. Okay, this is what makes me laugh when this Think Progress writer tries to say that, you know, the Supreme Court has ruled this multiple times with wrong cites. However, he tries to say that under the necessary and proper clause, I don't know, he makes some kind of weak constitutional argument when the authority he's looking for is libertarian. So I do kind of talk about the Magna Carta later. Oh, wow. Okay. I haven't read this in a really long time. It's funny to go back and see where I trace the etymology because it's reflected in subsequent episodes that I've done recently of the podcast. Okay, so I do talk about that. Here it is. Mayflower Compact. So essentially what I'm searching for right now is that in response to the Alien and Sedition Acts, sorry for these pauses here. In response to the Alien and Sedition Acts, the people stood up. It wasn't just James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, because I've been trying to get away from this idea that the American Revolution was all to do with the Founding Fathers, because in reality, there were two parallel revolutions that I've talked about and addressed in an episode of the show, one led by the people and one led poorly by the Founding Fathers.
So there's some great language in here that you can find at the 10th Amendment Center's website. So I really won't dwell on it. But what I'm trying to get at is that, where the hell is this in this paper? I apologize for this. There was, maybe I didn't write about this. Okay, I'm so sorry for this, guys. Well, in this book, this is the quintessential book, Reclaiming the American Revolution, the Kentucky and Virginia Resolutions and Their Legacy. I've talked about this in Liberation Library 2 episode. But essentially what happened after the Alien and Sedition Acts is that there were mass gatherings all across the country where the new Americans, the colonists, for lack of a better term, the average people declared themselves in their own pre-made, their own independent conventions of people. They decried the Alien and Sedition Acts themselves and drafted resolutions, not on behalf of the legislatures, but on behalf of themselves, calling it unconstitutional and saying that they will not enforce it and that it shouldn't be enforced. So you can search for that part. I can't remember exactly where I mentioned that. Now I feel kind of bad because I thought this was going to be a great part of the episode, but yeah. All right. So I'm not going to waste much more live streaming time on that. Sorry, this is not edited. So the Alien Sedition Acts are great. Just a final note on secession as we kind of come towards the end, because there are a lot of libertarians, left-leaning ones that generally aren't associated with the Mises Institute, who, you know, they have freedom as the ultimate goal. And if you're trying to seek a society without a government, I can see by their arguments that it wouldn't make sense why you would advocate for secession, because in of itself, the act of secession creates a new state. So let me say that again. In of itself, the act of secession creates a new state. I guess I wouldn't argue against that. I think that, you know, if a bunch of counties, in the sense that, you know, if Texas wanted to secede from the United States, Texas would secede and form its own state. The state of Texas. It'd be another government. Likewise with Catalonia, you know, if Catalonia seceded, they would be forming another state. So you could make the argument, and I think the correct argument, that it is a statist policy to nullify. Then you get into pragmatism, you know, what, and questions about what is the ultimate goal of libertarianism, of liberty. Is it to create anarchy, to liberate, or, you know, be an abolitionist and to, for lack of a better term, in a neocon sense, be libertarian dictators, to spread liberty through the use of force or through, you know, something else? Or is the ultimate goal of libertarianism self-determination? So I think it would be self-determination. And I think Tho Bishop echoes this point at the Mises Institute. These are points that Mises has made. These are points that Jeff Deist has made, specifically in his speech, Jeff Deist's speech that happened like last summer around this time, that had a lot of hoopla. And that's where this topic came out and what led to my discussion with Apollo Slater. Let's see, Jeff Deist's speech. So you can get my opinion on that. Thick versus Thin Libertarianism and Jeff Deist's speech, libertyweekly.net/24. You can hear me and Jerry talk about, Jerry, the old co-host, talk about Jeff Deist's speech. But, I mean, when it comes down to it, I think that self-determination, well, self-determination is the ultimate goal. And that means self-determination for the individual, I think. But self-determination, because self-determination for the individual works if you have quote-unquote laboratories of democracy where secession is available. It's easier if, so maybe, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but maybe for left libertarians, self-determination isn't good because our ultimate goal is to liberate, or maybe not self-determination isn't good, but our ultimate goal is to liberate people and to bring them out from underneath the state. Well, then, you know, they wouldn't have, I would assume that they would advocate for agorism on a massive scale, that you do everything within your personal power to get rid of the state and reduce its influence on your life. That's great. I think they would also advocate, I mean, where would they get to secession? At some point, you have to take a piece of land and declare that it is no longer a part of the state. So would the only good secession for them be seceding with the geographic area into Ancapistan? That's the only secession that would be good enough for them. Perhaps. I don't know. My point is that, you know, the American Empire aside, you know, if Texas wanted to secede from the American Empire, that'd be tremendous. That is, even though Texas would be creating its own state, which might even be more neocon, or it might even be more, or if California seceded, it might form its own Soviet state. All right, that's fine. They can do that. As long as people are able and free to leave California, or as long as there is a place for them to go, as long as it is practical for them to leave California and go to a different state. That's why I think that Misesian secession works. And I wouldn't 100% always be for secession, but I appreciate secession. I think it's the way forward from an American standpoint, at least, because, you know, anything is better than the American Empire. If we could get Wisconsin to secede from the United States, that would be tremendous. Wisconsin, even if they had full-scale communism, and that's what the people wanted, if people could leave, you know. So I think it's not as cut and dry to say I'm always for secession. I think self-determination is the best answer. In terms of like a Catalonia situation, I don't think I would advocate secession there, because you are just creating another state. And, you know, what are the prospects of it actually succeeding? I think the real world implications don't go away. You know, just because we are for secession as a principle doesn't mean it works in every situation. I think it'd be folly to make that point. So I'd love to, I think I have explored these topics. There is an episode on secession, but it doesn't display my updated opinions on the matter. That was one of the more popular early episodes. Let's see. Secession. It was, let's see. Oh, I wrote an article here. Secession. Okay. Getting to Ancapistan, secession begins at home. Episode 17. libertyweekly.net/17. Can get some early takes of my opinion. I think it was probably pretty cute to go back and listen to early Patrick McFarlane as a host. So those are some thoughts on secession. The next one I wanted to plug was just my Liberation Library 2 episode at libertyweekly.net/LL2, where I review Reclaiming the American Revolution, that book that I talked about. There's lots of great stuff in there. Let's see if you can. It's a great book. William J. Watkins Jr., I really enjoy him as a fellow legal professional. He does some tremendous work. So go and listen to Liberation Library 2. As always, links in the show notes page, and I see this episode's about 43 minutes long. So I apologize for some of that bumbling in the middle, just because I couldn't find that passage from my nullification paper. However, I think there's some good stuff. I'd like you to read that if you get the time. So you know how to support the Liberty Weekly podcast on Patreon, patreon.com/Liberty Weekly. I just picked up a whole bunch of books. I ordered like 6 books from Amazon the other day. Really excited for those to come, but that's what you help do with Patreon funds. Also, it goes to help pay my hosting fee. The biggest thing that helps me with the books is if you guys remember to my Amazon affiliate link. So go to libertyweekly.net/Amazon. It will take you right to the homepage. You can do your regular Amazon shopping, and I'll get a small commission, which I will directly, and let me emphasize this, directly put towards upgrading my equipment and to buying new books to produce better content. So the general theme of the books I picked up was foreign policy, mostly Iraq War II. There was a book from Vietnam, about Vietnam, And so I'm excited to bring those too. Picked up Hooper's War, which I'm excited to read as well. So thanks everyone so much. Again, patreon.com. Don't forget about that Amazon affiliate link. And this show will be up at libertyweekly.net/72. Hopefully I'll be back this week with Rayford Davis, if not next week. So that's about it. Thanks, guys.